I want to talk about a cold case that not my favorite term, but a term that everyone knows and understands that we've been able to close out and bring some resolution to this morning. On April 17th, 1993, Sherry Ann Ragsdale was found deceased inside her apartment at what was formerly known as the Greenfair Manor Apartments at 2704 Weber Drive. Sherry Ann was 28 years old at the time of her death. I want to point out that was almost 26 years ago, and most of the Lubbock Police Department did not work here at that time. In fact, I had just graduated the Lubbock Police Academy and was in my first or second phase of FTO training. And of all the detectives that have worked to finish this case out, to bring resolution to it, none of them, save for Lieutenant Poe, who's the commander of our Special Crimes Unit, none of them were employed with the Lubbock Police Department. In fact, only one of them that's in our Special Crimes Unit, Detective Gerber, worked at the police department at that time. And I want to say that to kind of give perspective to the fact that this is an old case. It's plagued, first and foremost, Ms. Ragsdale's family for a long time. And so we're very excited that we've been able to bring resolution to this case. I'll say right away, the suspect in this case is deceased. He passed away in 2007. In fact, October 18th of 2007, he passed away and was buried in the City of Lubbock Cemetery. I'll go through a timeline of this case. And I want to start with identifying some of the partners that helped us bring this case to resolution. The DPS Crime Lab, for one, was very instrumental. Also, the University of North Texas's Health Science Center for Human Identification was instrumental in helping solve this case. I also want to point out, at the time, Detective Doug Sutton, who's now a Chief Deputy with the Lubbock County Sheriff's Office. He was the initial investigator on this case who identified the suspect early on in the investigation of this case, and unfortunately it wasn't able to be prosecuted at the time. But because of those investigators' work at the time, evidence was collected and saved so that it could be closed out eventually, now 26 years later. And then also with the Sheriff's Office, the reason that we were able to bring closure to this case, if you remember a few months ago, we formed the Lubbock Metropolitan Special Crimes Unit, and I'm going to go into that here when I finish this timeline so that you'll understand that with Sheriff Rowe and along with support from the District Attorney's Office, we're able to build that unit so that we can focus more attention on these cases that continue to go unsolved, and families that continue to wait on answers. We're glad that we're able to bring resolution to this case. So let me go through some of the timeline with Ms. Ragsdale's case. Again, her death occurred April 17th in 1993. Early on, Detective Sutton identified the suspect, Kenneth Earl Taylor. He identified him as a suspect. In January of 1998, several years later, a case was presented to the District Attorney's Office. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough present to take it to prosecution at that time. A number of years later, in March 2017, the Department of Public Safety Laboratory was able to process swabs taken from the murder scene and process those for DNA, and a match was made. The results were entered into what's called a CODA system, and a match was made from a homicide in California. And so I'll touch on that again here in a minute, and I'm sure there'll be questions on it. A match was made from a homicide case in California. So we knew that Ms. Ragsdale's homicide was connected to the same suspect that committed a homicide in California, but no known sample from a suspect was in the system. So there was not a suspect with a DNA profile in our system for the homicide of Miss Ragsdale, nor for the case in California. However, detectives with the Lubbock Police Department, working off of that information, knowing that we had a suspect identified early in the 90s, took that information and began working on it going forward. Unfortunately, as I said before, the suspect in this case, Kenneth Earl Taylor, had already passed away 10 years prior. Detective LePage and Detective Pena with the Lubbock Police Department reached out to the mother of the suspect, of Kenneth Earl Taylor, and obtained a voluntary DNA sample. And working from there with the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, were able to do a familial identification and learn that that sample taken from Miss Ragsdale's homicide scene was a positive match for a biological child of that woman, of the mother of Kenneth Earl Taylor. Now understand, that's not a positive match to Kenneth Earl Taylor at the time, just that it was a biological child of his mother. Now there were several, or I don't know about several, but there were more than just Kenneth Earl Taylor. That occurred on December 8th of 2017. On March 5th of 2019, by then we had stood up the Metropolitan Special Crimes Unit. Detectives with that unit secured a search warrant and exhumed the body of Kenneth Earl Taylor from the Lubbock, City of Lubbock Cemetery, and collected DNA from his body. DPS flew in Dr. Gil King from UNT and helped with that procedure, and Dr. Gil King, working at UNT, was able to make a positive match from the suspect's DNA from his body that was exhumed to the DNA sample collected at the crime scene from Miss Ragsdale's homicide. It's a positive match for that, as well as the homicide in California. That's a long process. I'm sure you may have questions, and hopefully I can clarify some of those. I know one of the questions that will come up is it possible that there could be other crimes involved? And the question is, it's certainly possible, and we don't know that. There are some other Lubbock cases, not homicides, that we are looking at closely that we believe he may very well have been involved in. What is important is that now Kenneth Earl Taylor's DNA is on file, is that we do have that profile in the system, and so it can be compared against samples collected from any kind of case, be they homicides, sexual assaults, or anything else. And that's one of the most important things from this case. So there is the timeline that I've got, and again, here in a moment I'll answer questions. I do want to also give recognition to Miss Ragsdale's family. I met with them personally just a little bit ago. Her 3 children are here. I want to emphasize how long ago this occurred. Her daughter Portia was 3 years old when she was murdered. Her son Mercedes had not yet turned 2. He was almost 2 years old. And her daughter Alexis was just under 2 months old. This has been a difficult 26 years for them to grow up without their mom. I asked if they would be willing to answer questions. I'm confident that some of you will want to talk with them. Alexis Ragsdale, the youngest of her children, said that she would agree to speak with you, and we'll point out which one she is, and we would ask that you respect that the other 2 would like to defer questions to Alexis. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions that you might have.
When his body was exhumed, how was that DNA taken from his body? Was it bone, or How does that process work?
That's more technical than I understand. I'll have to get that for you. There were, I believe it was 13 or so samples taken to make sure that it was conclusively, is that right, 13? Yeah, 13 samples removed from different parts, teeth, bone, things like that, so that we could, you could make sure and go through the process. Again, it's a little more technical than I'm able to answer that for sure. I want to give just another shout out to the partnerships that we've got across the state. The fact that the DPS lab did that initial, well, we'll go all the way back in that. Detective Sutton and the ID detectives from the LPD in '93 had the foresight to collect the evidence that they did. Detective Sutton worked the case to develop a suspect initially, and though prosecution couldn't be had early on, that evidence was preserved, and then the DPS lab to test the evidence to get a DNA profile, and then DPS to fly the UNT, Dr. Gilking here to help in the collection to make sure we get the right DNA samples, and then UNT to process that for us. That relationship is just instrumental. And then, and if you'll notice the date, and you guys know that I'm as transparent as we can possibly, I'm willing to absolutely admit that there's a long time lag from December of 17 when the match is there until March of 2019 when the search warrant is served and the body is exhumed. That's a long time. And I acknowledged to the family earlier that we really would have preferred to make that identification and bring them closure a lot earlier than what is 15 months later. Unfortunately, at the time, our homicide investigations were part of our crimes against persons unit, and that staff worked all of our robberies, all of our sexual assaults, all of our aggravated assaults, and so in that time we've tried to find better ways to be more efficient. And cases, cold cases, I'll say one of the terms that I heard one of our detectives use is this case is on oxygen, can you help me out with it? Because this case, having a suspect that had already been deceased, was not going to be prosecuted. And while the detectives got other cases that have suspects that we're going after that are a danger to society, have to take priority. So part of what the sheriff and I looked at in creating a joint unit to have efficiencies across the county, in creating the Metropolitan Special Crimes Unit that Lieutenant Poe is leading, was to take homicides as well as suspicious death investigations, officer-involved shootings, all of these time-consuming investigations, and take them out of the daily operations, if you will, put them into a special crimes unit that also would say, hey, we're going to be able to follow up more efficiently on our cold cases. It freed up time, and as you've been able to see, I think it's really brought us a lot of efficiencies. And so that's been something that we've seen good progress on, that we can do these cases, we can provide more attention to them. And I think that down the road you're going to see that we can, whether we solve more and more, I know that we're going to be able to put more attention to them as those detectives have not more downtime, but simply more efficiency in what they're doing. Gabe?
Just wondering if you could tell us what sort of evidence from the crime scene that was collected that had Mr. Taylor's DNA that linked him as a suspect in this case.
Swabs with DNA.
What sort of objects were swabbed, I guess?
It was. I'm going to leave that until after. Again, it's because there's no because the case is finally done now. There's nothing going forward. I think out of respect for everything involved, we can talk one-on-one about that in just a bit. I don't want to get too in depth into the weeds on it with that.
Was there a relationship between the suspect and the victim?
Not more than just acquaintance type. There was no long-term relationship or anything like that. It was. I don't think they were absolute strangers, but it was. They weren't friends or anything like that. No.
Can you clarify what his status is in California? suspect?
They're still working that case. It's in progress, and so we don't want to go. You don't even want to talk about where in California. It's a large state, and so. But it is worth saying that the reason, and really the reason we bring that up is the fact that that is a key link in bringing it back to Lubbock. The fact that once the DPS lab was able to test those swabs and put them into the system, and we get a match out there, that's what really starts that ball rolling. They're working that case, and again, it's part of the day and age we live in right now of having this nationwide system that now that the suspect's DNA, his profile is in the system. Between here in California, if there is an unsolved homicide, an unsolved case of any kind, if they plug that in, they're going to get a hit not just of an unknown other case, but they're going to get a hit on a suspect now, and so that's such a great. A great resource that we have nationwide in law enforcement. What else?
So the fact that Metro Crimes Unit was able to get that DNA sample from Taylor's mother, did that really help bring this case together? Yeah, that's the crucial role. So, because we had a suspect, I think that we would have been able to get a search warrant to. But before you exhume bodies, I think everyone wants the police to be as sure as possible, and so since that was an availability, it was due diligence, and I appreciate the fact that our detectives looked at it and said, well, hey, let's go through this process as well, and so I can't applaud them enough for taking that extra step, because again, when they do that, if they hadn't have gone through that, and then it had not been a match, now you've exhumed a body, and that's a big deal. I think anybody's going to agree with that. And I'll even go a step further that records 10 years ago, and the grave doesn't have a headstone. There's all these things, and I just applaud the work of our detectives to go through, and before a shovel hit the ground, they double-checked and realized, hey, make sure this is the right grave. Our folks do that day in and day out. They just do an outstanding job of double-checking, triple-checking, and sometimes it takes a while, but they invariably get it right. What else?
Can you say how many cases or unsolved murders you're currently waiting on a possible DNA match for?
I'd have to get that exact number. We have a number of unsolved. How many unsolved cases do we have right now?
That we're typically working in 16 to 18 that we have on the books right now. Yeah, 16 to 18 on the books. Now, just to answer how many have a DNA profile, we'd have to look that up and actually get you that look, because some of them. I remember one from not too long ago where it was a situation where the detectives, there wasn't a deal where they even knew they had DNA evidence. Detectives looked at it and they said, hey, let's go look at the evidence that's in the property room from this and see what we could do with this. And when they did, they said, hey, let's resubmit this and see if the lab with this new technology that we just heard about can somehow get DNA off, and they did, and they got a hit from that. And so it's hard to really answer that, but we'll try to find out if there's any that are sitting and waiting with a DNA profile in the system where there's an unknown sample out there. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we'll check on that. Okay.
Is that something that happened here? Is that you had that I guess evidence tested, and the technology at the time wasn't strong enough to pull a sample, or was it just kind of continuing of submitting evidence for testing as
the latter? It's a case where really just following up and seeing what can be done down the road as they follow up on cold cases. Which I've said a number of times. I always, it's not my favorite term. It sort of implies that it's in a file box and no one's looking at it at all. Where this has remained assigned, and previously the detectives worked on them when they had the time. We've tried to create a system where now they've got more time, and they can focus on those more often, and they can expend more effort on the cold cases. Okay, so with that, I want to to close out first and foremost by expressing our deepest condolences to Ms. Ragsdale's children. That's a long time to wait on answers, and on behalf of the men and women of the Lubbock Police Department and on behalf of all of our partners, the Sheriff's Office, the Texas DPS, and the Lubbock Criminal District Attorney's Office, and quite frankly on all of the City of Lubbock, we express our deepest condolences to Ms. Ragsdale's family. I appreciate the partnership that we share day in and day out, and I appreciate you guys coming here and giving us the opportunity to acknowledge the closure of this case. Thank you.